The sun hung low over the Texas plains, its molten light turning the dry earth to gold and dust. The Dawson homestead sat at the edge of that dying light, tired, cracked, and hollow, like the people who lived within its splintered walls. Once the little farm had been rich with cornfields and laughter, but the drought had stripped it bare. The wind moved through the empty stalks like a ghost, whispering of a time when hope had lived here. Inside the small wooden house, Amelia Dawson wiped her hands on her faded apron and pressed a cool cloth to her father's forehead. Thomas Dawson, once a man of great pride and strength, lay pale and hollow-eyed, a victim not just of illness but of the burdens that had crushed his spirit. The cough racked his body, each fit seeming to take more out of him than the last. On the small table beside his bed sat a single envelope, Wyatt Kane's letter. "Tomorrow," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "He's coming tomorrow, isn't he?" Amelia's heart clenched, but she nodded. "I'll speak to him, Pa. Maybe he'll listen." Thomas's gaze, sharp for a moment, met hers. "Don't you beg that man." "Not for me." But Amelia already knew she would. The letter had been written in a neat, uncompromising hand. Final notice of payment. If funds are not delivered by the 15th, the land and property shall become the lawful possession of Mr. Wyatt Kane. There were no threats in the words, no cruelty, just the cold finality of law. Outside, Amelia stepped onto the porch and looked out over the land her father had fought to keep. The barn's roof sagged, one shutter hung loose, and the well had run nearly dry. Everything they owned had been bought with sweat and sacrifice. Everything they owned was about to be taken. In the distance, dust rose like a storm on the horizon, riders approaching. Her heart gave a sharp twist. By the time they reached the yard, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the ground. The lead rider dismounted first. Wyatt Kane, the rancher everyone whispered about, a man who owned half the county and feared nothing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black, and his expression carried the same hard certainty as the gun at his hip. Behind him, 3 men waited silently on their horses. Amelia stepped forward, her spine straight though her hands trembled. "Mr. Kane," she said, forcing her voice steady. He looked at her for a long moment, taking in the cracked porch, the hungry soil, and finally, her face, too young to carry so much worry, too proud to bow. "Miss Dawson," he said, removing his hat, "I'm here for your father's repayment. Is he able to speak?" Her jaw tightened. "He's too sick to come outside, but I can speak for him." Kane's expression didn't change. "The deadline passed. The law gives me rights to the property. I just need time," she said quickly. "There's a new calf coming, and if the rains return—" He cut her off with a small shake of his head. "Rain doesn't pay debts, Miss Dawson." Her eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall. "You take a dying man's home?" Something flickered in his gaze, perhaps pity, perhaps regret, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "I didn't make the rules. I just follow them." As he turned to signal his men, Amelia stepped between him and the door. "Please," she whispered. "Not tonight. Let me show you what this land means before you take it." For the briefest moment, Wyatt Kane hesitated. The setting sun caught her face, and he saw not weakness but a fierce, desperate courage that made his chest tighten. He gave a slow nod. "You have until sunrise," he said finally. "After that, the land is mine." And then he mounted his horse and rode off into the dusk, leaving Amelia standing barefoot in the dust, watching the man who would decide her fate disappear into the dying light. The next morning came cold and clear, the kind of dawn that smelled of dust and regret. Wyatt Kane rode ahead of his men, his black horse cutting through the mist that still lingered over the plains. The air was sharp, quiet, too quiet, and it left him alone with his thoughts, something he had long tried to avoid. People in town called him many things: a ruthless rancher, a hard man, a heartless collector. Most of it was true. He had spent years becoming that way. Once, long ago, Wyatt had been a man who trusted too easily, who believed that fairness and goodwill were enough to survive in a world built on greed. But those beliefs had died the night his father lost their ranch to crooked land agents. Wyatt had been 20 then, angry, powerless, and forced to bury his parents in soil that no longer belonged to them. That was the day he swore he would never be the one begging for mercy again. Now, his ranch was one of the largest in 3 counties. His herds numbered in the thousands. His ledgers were full, his debts always paid, but peace somehow, always out of reach. The men who rode with him respected him, but they feared him more. Wyatt had no family, no close friends, only the work. It was easier that way. When the Dawson debt crossed his desk, he hadn't thought twice. A failed farmer, a daughter, a worthless patch of land, it was business. But last night, when he looked into that girl's eyes, something had shifted. Amelia Dawson wasn't like the others who begged for mercy. She hadn't pleaded for herself. She'd stood in front of her father's door like a soldier, trembling but unbroken. He could still hear her voice, soft but steady. "Please." Not for me, for him. He tried to push the memory aside, but it clung to him like a burr. By the time he reached his ranch house, a grand, weathered structure sitting high on the ridge, his temper was simmering. He swung down from his horse, tossed the reins to the stable boy, and strode inside. "Coffee," he said curtly to Brock, his foreman, who sat at the long table tallying supplies. Brock looked up, smirking. "Another long night of charity work?" Wyatt shot him a glare. "You keep your mouth shut and your opinions shorter." Brock shrugged but didn't hide the smirk. "Just saying, Kane, you keep letting sob stories get in your head, you'll end up broke like the rest." Wyatt's voice was flat. "I don't let anything get in my head. I'm collecting the debt at sunrise." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. After Brock left, Wyatt stood by the window, looking out toward the empty horizon. His reflection in the glass looked older than his years, haunted, tired, lonely. The land outside stretched wide and endless, yet it felt hollow without a soul to share it with. He remembered Amelia's hands, raw and calloused from work, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her shoulders squared like she carried the whole world on them. He had seen desperation before, but hers was different. Hers came wrapped in pride. He didn't understand why it unsettled him so much. Maybe because once he'd known someone like her, his mother, standing at the doorway of their foreclosed home, watching strangers take everything her husband had built. Wyatt cursed under his breath and turned away from the window. It was weakness, he told himself. That's all it was, a momentary flicker of weakness. But as he sat at his desk and opened his ledger, the words blurred before his eyes. Numbers, names, debts, they suddenly seemed small against the image of a girl standing in the dust, daring him to show mercy. By nightfall, the decision had been made. Though he didn't yet realize it, he would ride back at sunrise, not to take the house, but to take her instead, not by force but by a bargain, a fair one by his terms. She would come work for him until the debt was repaid. The land would stay in her father's name. It wasn't mercy, he told himself. It was business. But as he sealed the papers and set them aside, Wyatt Kane couldn't shake the truth forming quietly in the back of his mind that for the first time in years, a voice other than his own had managed to reach his heart. The morning came gray and silent, the kind of dawn where even the birds stayed quiet, sensing something heavy in the air. The wind that swept across the Dawson farm carried with it the scent of rain, distant, uncertain, almost a promise. Amelia stood on the porch, her father's old rifle clutched in her trembling hands. She hadn't slept. Her dress was wrinkled, her hair hastily braided, and her eyes, those clear, storm-gray eyes, were swollen from tears she refused to shed again. Inside, her father slept fitfully, fevered and weak. She'd given him his medicine and tucked the blanket tight around his shoulders. He didn't know she planned to meet Wyatt Kane at sunrise, to face the man who could take everything from them. When the sound of horses broke the stillness, Amelia drew a breath and straightened. 4 riders appeared from the ridge, their silhouettes black against the pale sky. The one in front, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with quiet authority, was Wyatt. Even from a distance, he looked like a man who carried judgment in his very shadow. He slowed his horse at the gate and dismounted without a word. His men lingered behind, uneasy. The silence between him and the girl was thick enough to taste. "You came," he said finally, his voice low, gravelly. "I said I would," she replied. Her voice was soft, but it didn't waver. Wyatt studied her, eyes narrowing slightly. She looked fragile in that moment, but something about her posture, chin high, back straight, reminded him of people who refused to die easy. He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "This is the bill of transfer," he said. "Once it's signed, the property is legally mine. You can stay until your father—" "Don't!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "Don't talk about him like he's already gone." Wyatt hesitated. No one had ever interrupted him like that. Not with fire, not with grief. She stepped closer, her hands shaking but her words steady. "He worked this land all his life. Every fence post, every beam in that barn, he built it with his own hands. And you'd take it from him now, when he's too weak to stand?" "Miss Dawson," he said evenly, though his tone softened. "Your father made an agreement. I didn't force him to borrow. I'm only collecting what's owed." Her lips trembled, but she lifted her chin higher. "Then take me instead." Wyatt's breath caught. "What? Take me," she repeated. "I'll work for you. However long it takes. I'll pay what he owes with my hands, my time, whatever you ask. But let him die here, in his home." For a long moment, Wyatt said nothing. His men shifted uneasily behind him, pretending not to listen but clearly holding their breath. Amelia sank to her knees in the dirt. Her hands clasped together, eyes lifted, not in surrender but in desperate determination. "Please," she whispered. "He's all I have left. Take me, not the house." The world seemed to go still. The wind stopped. Even the horses turned restless, sensing the tension in their master. Wyatt stared at her, something twisting hard in his chest. He'd seen plenty of people beg before, but none like this. There was no shame in her voice, no deceit, only love. He looked away, jaw tight. Every instinct in him said to stay cold, to follow through. Business was business. Yet, as he glanced back at the fragile girl kneeling in the dust, he saw a reflection of something he'd buried long ago, his own mother on her knees, begging the men who had taken their land to show mercy. Wyatt cleared his throat. "Get up," he said roughly. She hesitated. "Will you let him keep it?" He looked at the ground for a long time, then back at her. "Be ready at sunrise tomorrow," he said quietly. "You'll come with me. You'll work off the debt." And before she could answer, he turned and mounted his horse. As he rode away, he didn't see her fall to her knees again, tears streaking down her face, not of despair but relief. For she knew she had saved her father's home, even if it meant giving up her own freedom, and for the first time in years, Wyatt Kane rode away not feeling victorious but unsettled, uncertain whether he had just spared her or condemned himself. The next morning dawned pale and cold, the kind of light that carries no warmth. The sun had barely risen when Amelia stood at the gate, a small bundle of clothes and bread tied neatly in a faded kerchief. She'd kissed her father's forehead one last time, whispering that she'd return. He hadn't woken. Perhaps it was better that way. She couldn't bear to see his eyes when she rode away with the man who now owned their future. The sound of hooves came before she saw them. Wyatt Kane arrived alone this time. His black stallion moved with calm strength, its coat gleaming in the light. Wyatt dismounted, and for a moment they simply faced each other, two strangers bound by a decision neither had truly wanted. "Ready?" His voice was low, unreadable. Amelia nodded, clutching her bundle tighter. "You'll keep your word? My father stays on the land?" "I gave my word," Wyatt said, his tone clipped, as if the promise itself cost him something. He turned, offering his hand to help her onto his horse. She hesitated only a second before placing her hand in his. His palm was calloused, firm, steady. When she sat behind him, she kept her distance, gripping the saddle instead of him. Wyatt didn't comment. They rode for hours, the wind in their faces, silence stretching between them like a taut rope. The countryside changed slowly from the dry, dying fields of her father's land to the vast, fertile expanse of the Kane Ranch. Fences lined the horizon, corrals filled with cattle, and sturdy barns stood proud under the morning sun. It was another world, one built by power, not struggle. When they reached the main house, Wyatt dismounted first. "You'll stay in the bunkhouse for now," he said. "You'll work with the kitchen staff and help where you're needed. You'll earn your keep." Amelia's gaze swept the yard. Dozens of ranch hands paused to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. A woman, clearly out of place among rough men. She lifted her chin anyway. "Understood," she said simply. One of the men, a tall, scar-faced cowboy named Brock, Wyatt's foreman, spat in the dirt and smirked. "Guess the boss finally brought himself some entertainment." Wyatt's head turned sharply. "Mind your tongue," he said, his voice quiet but dangerous. Brock held up his hands, grinning. "Just talking, boss." Amelia said nothing, but her face flushed. She wanted to run, to disappear, but instead, she squared her shoulders and followed Wyatt into the house. Inside, the ranch was cleaner, larger, and colder than she imagined. The floors gleamed, the walls smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Wyatt led her to the kitchen where Mrs. Hill, the cook, eyed her with mild suspicion. "She's here to work off a debt," Wyatt said. "You'll see she does her share." Mrs. Hill gave a curt nod. "She'll learn fast." "They always do when they've got no choice." Wyatt turned to Amelia. "You'll start at dawn. Don't speak to the men unless you have to, and don't wander." Amelia met his gaze for the first time since they'd left her home. "I won't cause you trouble," she said quietly. Something flickered in his eyes, something almost like regret, but he nodded once and left. That night, lying on a cot in the small bunkhouse, Amelia stared at the ceiling. The air smelled of hay and smoke. Outside, laughter drifted from the fire where the ranch hands drank and swapped stories. She turned her face into the pillow to muffle the tears she'd held back all day, but she didn't break. At sunrise, she was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, scrubbing floors before Mrs. Hill could even speak. She worked until her arms ached, her fingers raw. When she stepped outside, Wyatt was watching from the fence line, hat pulled low, expression unreadable. He'd brought her here as repayment, as punishment. But as he watched her push through exhaustion without complaint, something in him began to shift, quietly, dangerously, like the first crack in a wall long thought unbreakable. And for the first time in years, Wyatt Kane wasn't sure which of them had truly made the bargain. The days that followed were long and grueling. The sun rose over the Kane Ranch with merciless brilliance, and before its light even touched the far hills, Amelia was already at work. Her fingers bled from scrubbing floors, her shoulders ached from carrying water, and her hands burned from washing clothes in the icy trough. She had been raised on hard work, but this was a different kind of labor. It wasn't for her father's land or her own future. It was for debt, for survival, for a promise she had made in the dust and silence of that fateful morning. Mrs. Hill, the ranch's cook, watched her with a skeptical eye at first, waiting for the moment the girl would break. But Amelia didn't. She moved with quiet purpose, her lips pressed tight, her tears shed only in secret when the world was asleep. In time, Mrs. Hill's tone softened. "You don't complain much," she remarked one afternoon as they kneaded dough side by side. Amelia shrugged. "Doesn't make the work any lighter if I do." The older woman gave a small grunt of approval. "You're not like most that come through here. You've got backbone. That'll serve you well with Mr. Kane?" Amelia said nothing. She'd barely spoken to Wyatt since arriving. He passed through the kitchen sometimes, nodding curtly or asking brief, practical questions about supplies or schedules, but never lingering. Still, she could feel him, his presence, his watchfulness. He seemed to see everything and everyone, even when he wasn't looking directly. The men respected him, but they also feared him. The air shifted when he entered a room. Yet Amelia had glimpsed something else, something the others didn't see. There were moments, fleeting and rare, when his voice softened, or his gaze lingered on the horizon as if haunted by a memory he couldn't forget. One evening, as dusk settled over the ranch, Amelia carried a bucket of water to the corral. The world was painted gold and lavender, the cattle grazing quietly in the field beyond. Wyatt was there, leaning against the fence, coat off, sleeves rolled. His hands and arms bore the marks of labor. This was no man who simply gave orders from a distance. "Hard day?" he asked without looking at her. She set the bucket down and wiped her brow. "They all are." A faint smile touched his lips. "You're still here." "Most would have run by now." "I gave my word," she said simply. He turned his head, studying her. "To me?" "To my father." Her gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "And to myself." For a moment, silence hung between them, fragile as glass. Then Wyatt looked away, clearing his throat. "The work will get easier." "It never does," she replied softly, though not unkindly. "You just get stronger." That night, as a storm rolled in, thunder rumbling across the hills, Amelia sat by the window of her small room. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then fierce, drumming against the roof in wild rhythm. It had been months since she'd seen rain. She thought of her father, of the dry fields that might finally drink again. Then came a sharp knock at her door. She opened it to find Wyatt standing there, soaked from the rain, holding a lantern. "The roof in the west barn's come loose," he said. "I need help holding the ladder." She followed without hesitation. In the downpour, they worked side by side, Wyatt hammering, Amelia steadying the ladder with soaked skirts clinging to her legs. When lightning split the sky, he shouted over the roar of rain, "You should have stayed inside!" "And let you fall?" She shot back. When it was done, they stood in silence, breathless, dripping. Wyatt looked down at her, his eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't care what happens to me," he said roughly. She met his gaze, shivering. "Maybe I can't help it." For a moment, the storm around them faded. Only the sound of rain on wood remained, and the faint, dangerous warmth of something neither dared name. He turned away first. "Get inside," he said quietly, "before you catch cold." But as she walked back through the rain, Amelia knew something had changed, not just in her, but in him. And deep down, she feared that whatever it was far more dangerous than any storm. Part 6. Rumors and Rivalries, 600 words. By the time the rains passed and spring painted the Texas plains green again, Amelia Dawson had become part of the Kane Ranch in ways no one expected. The men still called her the debt girl behind her back, but their tones had changed, from scorn to wary respect. She rose before dawn, worked past dusk, and never once complained. Her quiet dignity began to unsettle even those who'd mocked her most. But rumors travel faster than good deeds. And out here, where gossip was the only entertainment for men too long without women, whispers grew like wildfire. "She's got Kane wrapped around her little finger," one ranch hand muttered over the evening fire. "Boss don't take kindly to beggars," another replied. "But he sure don't bark at her the way he barks at us." It was Brock, Wyatt's foreman, who fanned the flames. He'd always disliked Amelia, and not just because she'd softened the boss's hard edges. Brock was a man who measured power in how much others feared him, and Amelia, with her quiet defiance, made him feel small. He wanted her gone, or better yet, humiliated. So one afternoon, while Wyatt was away overseeing a cattle drive, Brock found his opportunity. Amelia was carrying a sack of flour from the storehouse when he stepped into her path. Blocking the door, "Excuse me," she said, keeping her tone polite but distant. Brock grinned, his teeth yellowed from tobacco. "You know, some of the boys are wondering what kind of work you're really doing here." Amelia stiffened. "Work you don't have the decency to understand." He laughed low, leaning closer. "You think you're special? You think the boss saved your pa's land because you're some kind of saint? You're just another girl who learned to beg the right man." The words hit like a slap. Her cheeks burned, but she didn't back down. "Say another word like that and I'll tell Mr. Kane myself." His smile turned cruel. "He'd believe you? You're nothing but debt on his books." Before she could respond, Mrs. Hill appeared in the doorway, her eyes sharp as knives. "You've said enough, Brock." He spat on the ground, glaring at both women. "This ranch has gone soft," he muttered, stalking away. Amelia stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding. She wanted to cry, but anger steadied her instead. Still, The seed had been planted. Rumors twisted like barbed wire through the ranch by the time Wyatt returned 3 days later. That evening, as he walked into the yard, conversation hushed. Eyes followed him, then darted away. He sensed the tension immediately. When Mrs. Hill finally told him what had happened, Wyatt's jaw hardened. He found Brock by the stables, sharpening a knife. "You been running your mouth about my worker?" Brock met his gaze with a smirk. "Just talk, boss." "Nothing but truth." Wyatt's hand shot out, grabbing him by the collar. "You call that truth? You spread filth about a woman who's worked harder than any man here?" The other ranch hands looked on, silent. Brock sneered. "You're defending her like she's yours." For a heartbeat, Wyatt froze. Then he shoved him back hard. "You're done here. Pack your things." Brock's eyes widened. "You'd fire me over her?" Wyatt didn't answer. He didn't have to. By nightfall, Brock was gone, riding into the dark with bitterness in his eyes. When Amelia heard what had happened, she didn't feel vindicated, only guilty. That night, she packed her few belongings. She couldn't bear the idea that her presence was tearing the ranch apart, or that Wyatt had risked his reputation for her. She was halfway to the stables when his voice stopped her. "Going somewhere?" She turned, startled, finding him standing in the moonlight, arms crossed. "I never meant for you to lose anyone over me," she said quietly. He stepped closer, his voice firm but low. "You think I'd believe lies from a man like Brock over you?" Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. "You shouldn't have to defend me." "I didn't do it because I had to." His voice softened. "I did it because you've earned more than their respect. You've earned mine." For a moment, neither spoke. The night around them was still, the stars endless. Then Wyatt said, almost to himself, "I don't know what you've done to me, Amelia Dawson, but ever since you came here, this place feels alive again." Her breath caught. She didn't know how to answer, so she simply whispered, "Then maybe it's not just your land that's changing, Mr. Kane." Summer came heavy and dry again, the grass turning brittle beneath the sun. Life on the Kane ranch settled into rhythm. Long days of work, quiet suppers, and nights filled with the hum of crickets and the soft, aching distance between Amelia and Wyatt. It had been months since the incident with Brock, and though the ranch had found its calm, neither of them had. The whispers had died, but the silence that replaced them was louder. Amelia kept to her work, though she could feel Wyatt's eyes on her sometimes, lingering just a moment too long. Then, one afternoon, the silence broke, not with words, but with the arrival of a rider from town. Wyatt was checking the north fence line when the messenger galloped in, dust rising like a storm behind his horse. Amelia was carrying a bucket of water when she saw them, the ranch hand dismounting in haste, holding a folded letter. "Message from Dawson's farm," the man said, his tone grim. Amelia's hands went cold. She took the paper, her fingers trembling as she opened it. The handwriting was messy, hurried, a neighbor's scrawl. "Thomas Dawson has taken a turn for the worse. You'd best come quick." The words blurred. She didn't think. She ran. Wyatt caught up to her at the stables, breathless. "What happened?" "My father. He's dying," she managed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I have to go." "Please, You'll take my horse," he said at once, untying the reins before she could protest. "No, I can't." He met her eyes, firm. "You'll get there faster." "Don't argue." She stared at him, her heart twisting at the rough kindness in his voice. "Thank you," she whispered, and before he could say anything more, she mounted and rode off into the burning horizon, wind tearing through her hair, the ranch shrinking behind her. By the time Amelia reached home, night had fallen. The house looked smaller than she remembered, shadowed and still. She burst through the door to find her father lying on the bed, his breathing shallow and ragged. "Pa," she whispered, kneeling beside him. Thomas Dawson's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded them, then softened into recognition. "Amelia, my girl, you came." "I'm here," she said, clutching his hand. "I came home," he smiled weakly. "You always were the strong one. Stronger than I ever was." "Don't say that," she choked. "You're going to be fine." He shook his head slightly, each breath a struggle. "I wanted to See you again, tell you. I was wrong to take that loan. You deserved better. Don't talk like that. But his voice was fading. Promise me you'll live, Amelia. Don't chain yourself to this land. There's more out there for you. Tears blurred her vision. You're my home. He smiled faintly, his hand going limp in hers. Then you'll carry it wherever you go. The last breath left him like a whisper. Amelia froze. Then she crumpled over his chest, her sobs breaking through the silence that filled the small room. The man who had been her world was gone. She buried him beneath the old cottonwood tree at sunrise, the sky blushing pink and gold. As she stood there, the wind stirred through the leaves, brushing her hair like a farewell. After the service, the town banker approached her, a tall, solemn man holding a single envelope. Miss Dawson, he said gently, this came through last week. Your father's debt, it's been cleared. The deed is yours again, Amelia blinked. Cleared? By who? The banker hesitated. Wyatt Kane. She couldn't speak. She turned away, clutching the deed to her chest, tears spilling freely. Wyatt had kept his word, but he'd done far more than that. He'd given her father peace. As she stood by the grave, the morning light warming her face, one truth settled deep in her heart. The man she had once seen as her captor had quietly become her savior. And now, she would have to decide whether to return to him out of gratitude, or something far deeper she was no longer able to deny. The road back to the Kane Ranch felt longer than it ever had before. Each hoofbeat echoed the ache inside Amelia's chest. Her father's words lingered in her mind. Don't chain yourself to this land. There's more out there for you. But where could she go now? The only place that still felt like something close to home was the one she'd once tried to leave behind. Wyatt's horse moved steadily beneath her, its strength a comfort in her silence. The wind was cool, the horizon gold with evening light, and yet the world felt heavy. When the ranch finally appeared, a dark shape against the wide open sky, her heart clenched. Would he even want her back? She'd left without saying goodbye, without thanking him, without explaining how much his quiet kindness had come to mean to her. When she rode through the gate, the ranch hands looked up from their work. Their faces softened with something like pity. Word of her father's death must have reached them already. She nodded politely and headed toward the house. Wyatt was there, standing on the porch, arms crossed, the brim of his hat low over his eyes. For a moment, neither moved. The silence stretched between them, full of everything unspoken. You came back, he said finally, his voice low, careful. Amelia dismounted slowly. It was your horse, she murmured, avoiding his gaze. I had to return him. He studied her, his jaw tightening. That's all? Her throat closed. My father's gone, she whispered. He spoke of me before he passed. Told me to live, to be free of debt. Wyatt took off his hat, his eyes softening. He was a good man caught in bad hands. Amelia nodded faintly. He was proud. Too proud. He didn't want me to see how much he was hurting. Wyatt's gaze deepened. Neither do you. That broke something in her. Tears spilled before she could stop them. Why did you do it? She asked, her voice trembling. Why pay his debt when you had every reason not to? He didn't answer at first. Instead, he stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. Because it wasn't right, he said quietly. You worked harder than anyone here. You earned your peace, Amelia. And maybe... He hesitated. Maybe I wanted to give you a chance I never had. She looked up, meeting his eyes. A chance for what? To start over, he said simply. The air between them grew still. For the first time, Amelia saw past the hardness of the man, past the legend of Wyatt Kane, the ruthless rancher. She saw the loneliness beneath, the guilt, the quiet hunger for something more than the land he'd spent his life protecting. I don't know where to go now, she admitted. He looked away, toward the wide, empty range. Then stay here. Not because you owe me, but because you don't, her heart pounded. Stay? He nodded once. This place could use someone like you. Someone who still believes in second chances. She almost smiled. You think I still believe in those? He met her eyes again, steady. You came back, didn't you? The simplicity of it undid her. She laughed softly through her tears, the sound raw and honest. I suppose I did. He reached out then, not to hold her, but to brush his hand along her shoulder, hesitant, unsure. You don't have to decide now, he said. You can take your time, but she shook her head. I already have. Wyatt frowned slightly. What do you mean? Amelia stepped closer, the distance between them disappearing like mist. You said I'd earned my peace, she whispered. Maybe that peace is here. With you. He stared at her, as though afraid to believe what he'd heard. Then, for the first time, Wyatt Kane smiled. A slow, quiet smile that reached his eyes. Then stay, he said, and let's see what peace looks like together. As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in amber light, Amelia felt something she hadn't in years. Hope. The ranch that had once been a place of debt and duty was now a home waiting to be rebuilt. Not just from wood and earth, but from forgiveness, courage, and love finally spoken aloud. The days that followed Amelia's return were gentler, almost deceptively so. The ranch thrived under her quiet influence. Tools found their places, books were balanced, meals came warm and on time. Even the cattle seemed calmer, sensing the steady rhythm she brought. But peace on the prairie never lasted long. One morning, as the sun barely crested the horizon, a cloud of dust rose on the southern trail. Wyatt shaded his eyes and saw two riders approaching. His jaw clenched. He recognized one immediately. Brock. The man he'd sent away months ago was back, his face darker, harder, and full of hate. Wyatt stepped off the porch, his boots sinking into the dirt as the riders stopped in front of him. You've got nerve coming back here, he said evenly. Brock dismounted, smirking. I got reason. He tossed a folded paper toward Wyatt's feet. Seems the Dawson land ain't quite yours after all. Amelia, who had stepped out behind Wyatt, froze. Wyatt unfolded the document. It was stamped with the seal of the county court, a claim challenge. What is this? Wyatt asked, his voice like gravel. Brock's grin widened. Turns out Dawson had more debt than what you cleared. I bought the remaining note from the bank. So technically her land's mine. Amelia's heart dropped. That's not true. The banker, he said. He didn't know I got there first, Brock interrupted, his tone venomous. Fair trade, fair paper. I'm here to collect what's mine. Or maybe I'll just take what you've been keeping from me. His eyes raked over her in a way that made Wyatt's blood boil. You'll take nothing, Wyatt said. Stepping forward, Brock's hand hovered near his holster. You gonna draw on me over a woman, Kane? That's rich. You used to be a man who didn't let feelings cloud his business. Wyatt's voice was low, deadly calm. I'm still that man, but you mistake decency for weakness. The air went still. The ranch hands who had gathered watched silently, the wind tugging at their hats. Brock sneered. You've gone soft. Over her, over debt, over pity. Amelia found her voice trembling but fierce. You think cruelty makes you strong? You're just empty, Brock. You've always been. That hit something raw in him. His hand twitched toward his gun, too fast, too sure. But Wyatt was faster. A single shot cracked through the air, echoing across the open plain. When the dust settled, Brock's gun lay in the dirt. His hand was bleeding, the bullet clean through the wrist. He stared at Wyatt, face pale, rage and fear warring in his eyes. You're done here, Wyatt said quietly, lowering his revolver. And if I ever see you near her, or this land, again, you won't be walking away next time. Brock cursed under his breath, clutching his wound. His companion hauled him onto his horse, and together they rode off, their silhouettes shrinking into the horizon. For a long time, no one moved. Then Wyatt turned, looking at Amelia. She was pale, shaken. You could have been killed, she whispered. So could you, he replied softly. And I wouldn't have let that happen. Tears filled her eyes. Why do you keep doing this for me? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Because somewhere along the way you stopped being someone I needed to protect and became someone I can't imagine losing. The words hung between them, heavy and real. Amelia stepped closer, her hands trembling. You could lose the ranch for what you did today. He met her gaze, steady. Then it's a fair trade. She stared at him for a moment, this man who had once been her enemy, now standing before her as her shield, and finally, she let the tears fall. She reached up, laying a hand on his chest. You risked everything. Wyatt covered her hand with his. No, he said quietly. I finally found something worth risking it for. The wind carried the last of the dust away, leaving the yard quiet again. But something had changed. The reckoning had come, not in bullets or debt, but in truth, and as the sun climbed higher, casting golden light over the ranch, Amelia knew what she'd been running from all along wasn't pain. It was love. The days after the shooting passed in a strange calm, like the land itself was holding its breath. Brock was gone for good, but his shadow lingered, a reminder of everything that had been lost and everything that could still be taken away. Amelia tried to return to her daily work, but her hands shook when she carried the milk pail, and her heart raced whenever she heard hoofbeats in the distance. Wyatt noticed, though he said nothing. Instead, he gave her space, while quietly making sure she was never alone. Every night she saw the light in his window burn late. She knew he wasn't sleeping either. One evening, the air turned cool, the sky awash in lavender and gold. Amelia stood by the fence line, watching the cattle graze, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She thought of her father, of the small farmhouse now standing empty, of the girl she used to be, fearful, uncertain, dependent on men who saw her as a burden. And then she thought of Wyatt Kane, the man who had come to take everything, only to give her back more than she'd ever owned, her pride, her safety, her worth. She heard the crunch of boots behind her and turned. Wyatt was walking toward her, his hat in his hand, his face softened by the fading light. Fence looks good, he said quietly. You've got an eye for what holds and what breaks. Amelia smiled faintly. Maybe that's because I've been both. He stopped beside her, leaning on the post. You shouldn't have to be. She looked at him, really looked at him. The lines of weariness on his face, the strength in his eyes, the loneliness he still carried even in her company. You've carried this ranch alone for too long, she said. You think you're made of iron, but even iron bends if it bears too much weight. He gave a small, sad laugh. You sound like my mother used to. What did she tell you? That love don't come from strength. It comes from mercy. He glanced at her then, his eyes holding hers. I didn't understand her till you. The words caught her off guard, warm and sharp all at once. Wyatt, she began, but her voice faltered. He turned fully toward her. When I first saw you, all I saw was your father's debt. I thought taking you in would settle it, make me the kind of man who did right by his business. But then, he paused, shaking his head slowly. You changed everything. You made this place feel alive again. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know how to live without owing someone, she whispered. First my father, then you. He took a step closer. Then stop owing. Start choosing. The words settled deep inside her. She looked up at him, her breath trembling. And if I choose to stay? His hand brushed her cheek, rough from work yet impossibly gentle. Then I'd build this place for you, not as a debt, not as charity, but as a life we make together. Amelia's heart ached with something vast and fragile. You'd have me here after everything? He smiled faintly. Amelia, there ain't a thing you could do that'd make me turn you away. You brought light into a house that forgot what warmth was. The last of the sun dipped below the hills, the sky deepening into dusk. She reached for his hand, and for a long moment, they simply stood there. No words, just the rhythm of the wind and the steady beat of something new being born between them. Finally, she whispered, then I'll stay. Not because I owe you, but because I want to. Wyatt nodded slowly, his voice rough with feeling. Then that's my promise to you, Amelia Dawson. From this day on, you'll never stand alone. She smiled through her tears. And that's mine to you, Wyatt Kane. Whatever comes, I'll stand beside you. The stars began to appear above the open range, bright and unending, as two souls, once bound by debt and sorrow, found the freedom that comes only from love freely given. And in that vast, quiet world a promise was made, not written on paper or sealed in law, but in the unspoken truth between them that even the hardest hearts can be mended, and even the harshest land can bloom again.